Please welcome the Education Director for FDIC and the Editor-in-Chief of Fire Engineering, Chief Bobby Halton.
Please stay standing for just a second before we begin. As is our custom, unfortunately, we usually have people who aren't on the list. And we always like to start our FDIC in the traditional way by dedicating it. And this year, we would like to dedicate this year's 2014 FDIC to the memories of Lieutenant Ed Walsh and firefighter Mike Kennedy, who lost their lives in the service of the city of Boston. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Sit down, please. Good morning, and welcome to the 87th Annual Fire Department Instructors Conference. On behalf of everyone at Fire Engineering and Penwell Publishing, I would like to thank you for joining with us in the greatest celebration of fire service training in the world. Please join with me one more time in one round of applause for the beautiful music of the voices of the IFD, that incredible display of honor, and Father Carney. It is an honor to be allowed to recognize all of the wonderful people who participated in the opening ceremony this morning, and to be able to thank all the instructors, volunteers, and staff who have made this conference the incredible success that it has been so far. I cannot express in words alone our deep appreciation for the selfless efforts of the wonderful fire departments of Northern Indiana, the Indiana Convention Center, and the good citizens of Marin County. And I know that I speak for every instructor and student in the room today when I also express our deep appreciation for the incredible generosity of the countless manufacturers and vendors who supported us over the last 2 days of hands-on training, where 6,000 students went through the greatest training in the world. Without all of these incredible partners and their selfless generosity and commitment to firefighter excellence, we could not do the hands-on training we just successfully completed. And so to everyone who has contributed and to everyone who has sacrificed to help produce this 87th FDIC conference, please accept this round of applause from all of us who have benefited so greatly from your kindness and your generosity. You know, it's indeed a tremendous honor and overwhelming privilege to be allowed to speak with you here briefly this morning. You know, we gather here at FDIC to fulfill a common need. We're always looking for inspiration, sources of positive motivation, affirmation that there's goodness in the world. People are always looking for role models. Sadly, today we find ourselves in a world where our traditional role models, those in our elite political class, our professional athletes, and the entertainment world, seem to be out of touch with our sensibilities and quite frankly, lacking in that goodness. However, today more than ever, good people appreciate the fact that there's one group of professionals that places their values first in everything they do. They appreciate the fact that there still exists a group that, to the man and woman, hold one another accountable for the values that we espouse. Firefighters, you and I are those individuals. You and I are both the inheritors and the caretakers of the culture, the legacy, and the artifacts of the fire service. Our fire culture, her mission and traditions are bound together by an intricate and well-developed relationship between a core set of values and principles. To shepherd this culture requires many voices. And thankfully, our wonderful fire service is made up of an incredibly diverse group of individuals. And that diversity allows us to innovate when necessary, to find solutions when called on, and to endeavor always to restore calm during times of chaos. To do so, firefighters have to be mentally agile, morally grounded, and emotionally connected. We must be well-trained and well-disciplined. We must be dedicated to the relentless pursuit of the perfection of our craft. To do so requires that firefighters question everything. And so it probably shouldn't have come as a big surprise that I was recently asked to speak at an international conference on why loyalty and service are no longer relevant in the fire service. To be absolutely clear, I could not disagree more with that statement. Loyalty and service are not a thing of the past in the fire service. Of our core values, loyalty ranks high, and selfless service is first and foremost. Selfless service is our keystone value today, it was yesterday, and it will be tomorrow. Loyalty in the fire service is not as simple as it is for other industries and professions. For us, it's about loyalty to oneself, one's community, one's organization, and most importantly, one another. Like any institution, the fire service isn't perfect. We've suffered our losses. We've struggled occasionally with our identity and our relevance. We've won the hearts and minds of our communities one day and fallen far short of our own expectations on another. But never let it be said by an insider or an outsider that any true firefighter was ever disrespectful of our values, that any honest and good firefighter ever besmirched the name of the fire service or was intentionally disloyal to their fire service, their community, or their nation. For at our core are our values that have defined who we are, that are the inescapable measures of our character, and that require, from time to time, to be reinforced. As good stewards, we're required from time to time to tell stories about loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, integrity, honor, and personal courage. We tell our stories as much for others as we do for ourselves. We do so to provide that inspiration, to reaffirm our commitment to our values. And it is especially fitting that we should do it here at FDIC, where for 87 years our values have come to life in our discussions, in our meetings, and in our training. Every firefighter knows that no conversation about the fire service can be had without an understanding and an appreciation of selfless service. And this conversation this morning is no different. But we must also say a word about loyalty. For it is loyalty that provides us with that inner security that we need to accomplish our mission, an unfaltering belief in one another, an unfaltering love of one another. All of us who have placed our lives in the hands of another, know that loyalty is the value that sustains us in life-threatening situations. And we know that we cannot expect loyalty without being prepared to give it as well. We know that a leader can neither demand loyalty nor win it by talking about it. Loyalty of firefighters is a gift that they give you when and only when you deserve it, when we train them well, when we treat them fairly, and when we live by those values that we talk about. There's no loyalty fiercer than firefighters who've learned to trust their leaders to take them safely through danger right alongside them. Loyalty in battle is perhaps best described by, believe it or not, a French general from the 1800s. Yeah, believe that? An arc de pique. And the general said this: 4 brave men who do not know each other will not dare attack a lion, but 4 less brave, knowing each other well, thereby sure of their reliability and consequently of mutual aid, will attack resolutely. And in a simpler time, Epicurus said, it's not so much our friends' help that helps us as the confidence of their help. Firefighters fight for each other. Loyalty is commitment. Loyalty that manifests itself more in deeds than in words. For a few moments, we'll look at our core value, selfless service, and its marriage to loyalty. For a few moments, we'll share the stories of those who answered the call to serve and be humbled by the character of those who placed selfless service and loyalty first. One of the most significant examples of loyalty and service comes to us from 1,000 men. Very, very young men, I might add. And this is the story of one of those men. It was July 12th, 1940. The pilot was 28. He was probably 8 years older than most of the other pilots. Despite his age, he was the rookie. Today was to be his first combat flight. Sitting in the cockpit of his Hurricane, vibrating from that powerful engine, he prayed silently for courage and strength. His name was Billy Fisk. To his friends, he was known as the Yank. The Hurricane he sat in today was new. That tight Hurricane cockpit reminded of his days racing bobsleds. His mind flashed back to winning his first Olympic gold medal in 1928, exhilarated and shocked that at 16 he was the youngest man to ever win an Olympic gold medal. He thought about winning his second gold medal in 1932 in a brand new bobsled, just like the Hurricane he sat in today. Billy Fisk was an unofficial American RAF pilot. You see, he had to pose as a Canadian in order to join the RAF, and although they all knew he was an American, they let him in. Billy was the only member of a squadron dubbed the Millionaires Club. When his turn came, the rookie powered up that Hurricane, and he lifted her gently into the sky. It is so important that we understand this young man's story. He was there by choice, as are all firefighters. Choice is a magnificent standard up to a point. Choice is the gift of freedom. Men have made it clear that they desire freedom and that they are willing to die for it, but that the freedom they want is not from unconstrained choice. Rather, it's the opportunity to express themselves, to enrich themselves, and to govern themselves in a world that's already been defined by a set of intuitively understood natural commitments. In an earlier time, these natural commitments were called nature's law, or God's laws of nature. In America, we enshrine those laws in our revered Bill of Rights. Our fire service mission affirms that these natural commitments exist, are protected, and are valued in our societies. Our fire service mission assures that people can assemble without fear, can go to work assured that they are protected, can worship and travel in safety, knowing that firefighters are watching over them, always vigilant, always ready, respecting and protecting those intuitively understood natural commitments. What young Fisk was fighting for in the skies over England was political liberty, the greatest gift a people can acquire for themselves, a gift which is threatened when social order is threatened, and social order is protected by law enforcement, the fire service, and the military. Billy Fisk understood what he was fighting for, and so did his fellow pilots. They fought to maintain commitments that had taken centuries to create, but that could be lost in a generation. Freedom, political freedom, religious freedom would be lost to the German socialists if those of lesser character who would gladly trade freedom for stability or security for liberty had their way. And it was even more significant for Fisk. You see, he was born the son of wealth and privilege in Chicago. He understood what Hitler and his National Socialist Worker Party were trying to destroy: individual freedom. And the Battle of Britain wasn't the first time he stood up to Hitler. When he was asked to captain the 1936 U.S. bobsled team, he declined the honor. He said he would not compete in Hitler's Berlin. He would not be a guest in Hitler's Germany, where those intuitively understood natural commitments had been destroyed and replaced with despotic, tyrannical socialism. Billy understood that back home, people were calling him a traitor. Some people were calling for his arrest, of his defiance of the 1935 Neutrality Act that forbade Americans from going into war zones, more or less joining with the brave Canadians and heroic British in the fight. But none of that mattered for Billy Fisk. It was values that drove him on. It was his respect for those natural commitments. He understood that there are things that men and women fight and die for: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of association. Billy was fighting tyranny at the risk of his own freedom, his citizenship, and his very life. And so 27 days and 42 sorties later, we find an exhausted Billy beginning his third combat sortie of the day. Having survived the Battle of Britain now for only 4 weeks, he was considered one of the old guys. Cruising 10 minutes into his flight at 20,000 feet, he saw him. 400 Hinkle bombers surrounded by dozens of fighters, and they're heading straight for him. Billy switched his guns from safe to fire. A Hinkle 111 came into his view. Around him, the air was filling with smoke, screaming fighters, a couple of parachutes, and a few greasy fireballs. His radio was full of urgent voices. Some were smooth and some were panicked. Billy's fighter roared in on the German bomber. He fired a short burst. The Hurricane shuddered as almost 200 .303 rounds slammed into the side of that German bomber. The 111 kind of shook. She dipped. She rolled abruptly on her side just before that right wing snapped off. That's when Billy saw him. Angry little yellow bits of light, tracers flying by his cockpit. Instinctively, he pulled back on the stick, taking that Hurricane's nose into the air, when suddenly his entire cockpit erupted in fire. He knew his Hurricane was on fire, and he was burning alive. He could feel his grip losing his hands on the stick. He knew he should bail out of that plane. But he also knew that the British needed every plane, and if he ejected to stop the burning, that would be one less plane in the fight. And so now, 12 miles from RAF Biggin's landing field, he decided to bring that wounded aircraft home. Slipping in and out of consciousness with the failing aircraft now dead stick, its engines quit, he was going for a landing at Biggin's. Slamming hard into the field at Biggin's, Billy's fuel tank erupted again in horrific fire, and the cockpit became engulfed in flame. A horrified ground crew pulled a burning Billy from his own aircraft. 2 days later, Billy Fisk, two-time Olympic bobsled champion, movie maker, the man who founded the Aspen Ski Lodge, a millionaire who could have avoided war altogether, became one of the first Americans to die in World War II. On a cold and rainy August 1940, 6 members of Billy's millionaire squadron carried him to his final resting place. On his coffin was the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes. This brave young American RAF pilot was one of 7 Americans to fight heroically in the Battle of Britain. The honor guard stood tall and proud, and taps were played quietly on a hill. Over the coffin stood his mother and dad, racked by this dreadful loss of their son, devastated emotionally by this dreadful loss, but nonetheless proud of his devotion to duty, proud that their son, raised in privilege, who could have easily avoided war altogether, but rather chose and volunteered for the actions that would claim his young life. My friends, this is loyalty. This is service. This is love. This is the type of loyalty that true firefighters understand. They know that their service assures us the freedom to assemble and to live and to move securely. They know this is why we were called, to protect churches, schools, and places where liberty is celebrated. This is why we joined. Like Billy, to protect those naturally understood commitments. You gathered here today, you merry band of brothers and sisters, you protect those commitments. What you do protects society, the weak and the strong, the rich and the poor. What you do as firefighters exemplifies and provides us living examples of loyalty and service. By your work, you honor men and women of character like Billy Fisk, who were willing, like you, to risk their lives for strangers, who were dedicated, like you, to the service of their communities, and who, like you, will give their last full measure for one another. Today, there are those who would have you believe that great men like Billy Fisk are no longer among us, but that is a lie. Today, there are those who would have you believe that America's best days are behind her, but that is a lie. And today, there are those who would have you believe that morality and virtue and character no longer matter, but that is the greatest lie of all. Morality and virtue and character do matter. Let me share with you a similar story. As the dust settled on September 11th, weary firefighters, stunned and confused, were searching among the rubble for any sign of survivors. Among those searching was a former NYPD police officer, now an FDNY firefighter, Chris Angeldrum. Chris also served in active duty with the U.S. Army and was deployed in 1990 as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne. On that tragic day in September, with his fellow firefighters from Ladder 61 in the Bronx, Chris was searching among the rubble for any sign of his fallen brothers. As Chris was searching, one of the firefighters came across an American flag on the ground. Chris called to Captain Mike Dugan and said, "Cap, where can we raise this flag?" Captain Dugan grabbed a nearby ladder. He threw it up against a light post still standing in the rubble. With Chris bucking that ladder, they raised that flag. This is not the iconic flag photo you've all seen taken later in the day. This is a flag raised moments after the collapse, while the dust was still heavy in the air, while the wounded were still looking for treatment, and while the survivors were still looking to rescue anyone they could. This is the first flag raised over Ground Zero, a flag raised in defiance of those who would try to hurt us, raised instinctively, raised courageously by firefighters of character. Several weeks after 9/11, Chris would learn that members of his old unit, the 27th Brigade, were going to go backfill the legendary 69th New York Irish for duty in Iraq. Chris couldn't let his old teammates go without him, so he re-enlisted in the fight in 69th. Chris re-enlisted because of a sense of loyalty, a sense of duty, a sense of honor, a calling to service. Chris re-enlisted because men like him, people like you, are always true to their character. On a miserable November 29th, 2004, the armored Humvee carrying Chris and Specialist Wilfred Urbana, also a firefighter in civilian life, and another FDNY firefighter, Danny Swift of Ladder 43, and 3 other soldiers, was hit by an IED. Chris and Wilfred, both soldiers, both firefighters, were killed. Chris was there because he couldn't let his teammates go fight without him. That same loyalty is expected. It's demanded from each and every one of us. The same service is demanded from you and from me. The same kind of loyalty and service that Billy and Chris exemplified by their devotion to our values. Chris became the first member of the Fightin' 69th to die in Iraq. Chris was the first member of the FDNY to die in active duty military service following 9/11. Now as never before, we need to be great role models. Now as never before, we need great firefighters like you gathered here today, men and women who are strong enough to their values and principles to remain true. There are many things you're going to do in life that matter, but nothing matters as much as that which you do for others. One last short story. You see, heroics don't skip generations. It's part of our culture. And selflessness does not come and go in a society. It's perpetuated. And loyalty, it's not taught in books. It's learned from example. It was November 1965 in the jungles of Vietnam, and an Army patrol unit was out. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire hits the point man, wounding him severely and throwing him to the ground. The other soldiers jumped instinctively behind a berm, taking cover as bullets hit all around them with deadly accuracy. The wounded point man began calling out in terror and pain for help, pleading for his brothers to please come and help him. After several agonizing moments, one of the soldiers behind the berm threw off his rucksack, grabbed his M14, and began to climb over the berm. His fellow soldiers reached up and grabbed him by his ankles and dragged him back. "It's a trap!" they screamed. "It's a trap, and if you go out there, you get yourself killed and nothing else. He's gone already, and there's nothing you can do for him." Point man continued to cry out, again calling for help, calling for his mother, as dying men will do, calling for anyone to please come and help him. Behind the berm, the soldier again grabbed his rifle. He could stand it no longer. He left from behind the safety of that berm and began a zigzag pattern under horrific fire to try to get to his wounded brother. The soldiers behind the berm tried to lay down cover fire, but the enemy had them pinned down in a hail of gunfire that continued to rain down now on the two men out in the open together. As the gunfire continued relentlessly, suddenly at the top of the berm appeared the soldier carrying the now dead point man back to the security of the berm. The rescuing soldier himself was fatally wounded. And as he lay there bleeding to death, his fellow soldiers gathered around him and said, "Why? Why would you go out there, knowing it was a trap, knowing the point man was dead already, knowing you were throwing your life away for nothing? Why?" The dying soldier looked up at his fellow soldiers and he said, "Do you know what he said when I reached him?" He said, "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd come. Citizens trapped in burning buildings will hear our sirens coming in the distance and know that we are coming, and know that we will enter those buildings if necessary to rescue them, despite our own personal concerns, despite the danger to our own personal welfare. We will come. We will come, because loyalty to those intuitively understood natural commitments does matter." Billy Fisk understood that his chances of surviving the Battle of Britain were few, but his loyalty drove him on. Chris Angeldrum had a premonition that he'd never survive his second tour of duty, yet he served with distinction. He served loyally. Vince Lombardi once said, "There are lots of coaches out there with good ball clubs who know the fundamentals. They have plenty of discipline, but they still don't win the game. They're missing the third ingredient. If you're going to play together as a team, you've got to care for one another. You've got to love one another. And the love that I'm speaking of is loyalty, which is the greatest of loves. In the fire service, that love, that loyalty for each other gives us the confidence we need to complete our work. That love, that loyalty assures each of us that despite the risk, despite the danger, when a citizen or a brother firefighter calls out for help, we will come. Everyone in the every one of you in this room, you elite members of the fire service, should stand a little taller, because you are role models to me, to your fellow firefighters, and to America. We should be amazed that anyone would question whether loyalty and service are still relevant in the fire service. We have answered that question 1,000,000 times. Millions have gratefully said, "I knew you'd come." That love, that loyalty was on brilliant display in 2013 by thousands of courageous firefighters who came loyally, as did Joe Hostetler. Where are you, Joe? Joe Hostetler, who is standing right here today, who on December 24th, 2012, while responding with the Webster Fire District, was shot as he exited his car. Nearby, Chief Mike Chaparini and firefighter Ted Sardino lay dead, shot in the cab of 121. Joe, though wounded in the back and the legs, alerted the other responding units, thereby saving dozens of other firefighters. We came loyally and courageously, as did firefighter Mike Janzenko of Kearney, New Jersey, who on January 20th, as firefighters were evacuating the top floor of a 3-story wood frame due to rapidly deteriorating conditions, was caught in a collapse. Barely escaping, Janzenko observes 2 firefighters pinned by burning debris. Janzenko grabs a corner of debris, pulls the captain out. He returns up those steps. Despite brutal conditions, spots a second firefighter's boots, reaches in, grabs him, and helps him out of the burning building. We came loyally and courageously, as did Bryan, Texas Lieutenant Craig Pickard, who on February the 15th in 2013, as a fire raged in a Knights of Columbus Hall, partial collapse occurring, led the team of firefighters, RIT team of Mante and Moran, who are seated in the front row today. Stand up, gentlemen. Answering Lieutenant Eric Wallace's Mayday call. While extricating Lieutenant Wallace, the fire experienced a sustained flashover. Pickard, Mante, and Moran, just like Billy Fisk, were burning alive. Yet despite unimaginable pain, they never let go of Lieutenant Wallace. They continued until all 3 of them collapsed on fire 10 feet from the door. All 3 were horribly burned, and Lieutenant Pickard died from the burns he received in that rescue. We will come. We will come because we're firefighters. We will come because we do love each other. We were shocked when we were asked if loyalty and service still matter. We were shocked, and rightfully so. But no firefighter has ever been shocked when through the smoke and through the flames, a brother firefighter or a trapped civilian has looked up at us and said, "I knew you'd come." Thank you, and God bless the United States of America.